Hello and welcome to the latest webinar from Cloud Assess. We hope you enjoy.
Good afternoon, ladies and gents. Thank you very much for joining us for the webinar today. So today we have for you from design to delivery, crafting assessments that work. I'm going to be facilitating for Kerri Buttery, our special guest today. So Kerri's also going to be on screen and stepping us through the majority of the agenda. We'll jump straight in and we'll start off with a quick acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which we work and live. We pay our respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and elders past, present and future. Awesome. Today's webinar, we want you to get involved and engage with the topics and the subjects. There's going to be some Slido sort of polls and lots of interaction. We also, using the webinar functionality, have a Q&A. One of my team, Miles, is going to help facilitate the Q&A, so please drop in questions. Let's get lots of conversation going. And towards the end of the webinar, we will have some dedicated time to sort of talk through those questions and get more interactive with anything that you've dropped in there. So please don't hesitate, fire those questions in, and let's get as many people as we can using the voting in the Slidos and stuff. Really want to get your thoughts, feelings, and get to understand some of those common challenges that are around at the moment. So without further ado, I'll introduce you to the fantastic Kerri Buttery from VetNexus. And Kerri, you can go and introduce yourself and we'll step forward.
Excellent. Thanks, Alex. And thanks everyone for joining us today. We've got a lot of people coming on. Give you a brief outline of my background. I have been working in the vet sector for quite some time, since my first year of teaching in 1999. And in that, my favourite thing in education is that intersection of technology and education. So in that time, I've worked as a trainer and assessor, an RTO manager, head of department, consultant, e-learning advisor, a whole range of different things, and all the way across schools, RTOs and higher ed. So interesting fact, one of my first subjects that I lectured at university was accounting. So a bit of a broad background there. The third thing to tell you about me is I am a crazy cat lady. I've got 2 rag dolls, and they're the ones that when I come home at night, they don't leave my side. So just a couple of fun, interesting facts about me. So we will have a look at our agenda, and Alex and I will present this together. We'll have some areas where Alex will jump in and contribute. We're going to start with what is assessment and why is it the gatekeeper of quality? And really look at what we need to have quality in our assessment. Through that, we'll go through a few areas around the new draft standards. So we're still waiting for that endorsement of those standards to drop. Then we're also going to look at picking the best methods and modes, and what's really important to have a look at there around what your unit of competency requires. And we're going to have a look at a few steps around effective assessment tools. And then Alex is going to give us a preview of our content editor that we have got in Cloud Assess now, finishing up with some Q&A.
Awesome. Thanks, Kerri. First in, we're going to jump straight into an active poll. So if you've not used Slido before, you can just use your smartphone, scan the QR code in the top left of your screen there. You can also open a browser tab and drop in slido.com, and when you hit the website there, there's just a number so you can participate in the poll that's shown on my screen. The question we're posing: what is your biggest assessment challenge? So think of the now. What is your biggest assessment challenge? Okay, we've got some votes coming in nice and quickly already. We're all familiar with this, it looks like, which is great. We'll give you a minute or two, and as soon as they start to settle out, we'll see how we go.
Oh, we're getting some differentiation now.
Yeah, we are indeed.
And if you've got something that we don't have in the list, throw it in the chat. Let us know if you've got a different challenge that isn't on the list.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good idea.
Getting some good numbers in there. We've got over 30 people in the Slido itself.
Yeah. Yeah, fantastic. We seem to be a very compliance-focused bunch, which is good.
And probably not surprising as well to have that one as the top challenge, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it might be a bit of a runaway with
Yeah.
compliance. Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, Kerri, yeah, very, very much the case. The compliance challenges around assessment, I think categorically going to apply to everybody. Whereas, it's yeah, there's still a efficiency. From an operational perspective, efficiency can actually be a barrier to perhaps practically delivering some aspects of the process there. So I get it. That's
Yeah. We've got a few things there that sort of make it, if we hit a mark on one of them, it can make one of the others harder. So practicality can be very different in terms of engagement. So sometimes it might be, well, practically and for efficiency, let's do multiple choice questions for everything, because that makes it quick. But then our engagement drops and our compliance drops.
absolutely. Interestingly enough, the industry alignment, we were in a separate webinar last week that I was running, and industry alignment or industry engagement was actually quite a hot topic. It scored a lot higher than I expected it to. We had some really good insights from the group there as well. Industry alignment so important in the apprenticeships, traineeships, especially, but really root cause of that. What are we doing to supply the workforce? And there was a lot of very sort of challenging conversation and some really good experience shares in that.
Yeah. And different ways that we can do that industry engagement as well. It can, there are so many formal and informal ways that we can do that. And sometimes we find that companies that are doing this really, really well in terms of engaging aren't always capturing the evidence that they're doing it. And it becomes an issue for their compliance, even though they've got some really good things that they're doing. It's capturing that evidence.
Absolutely agree. And I think one piece with industry alignment is the currency piece that you've got to, what frequency do we temperature check that as well was very topical. So yeah,
Mm.
all the results. I think we'll move on from there. But yeah, we had a good number of you jumping in and voting. I can see there's a number of people that would have definitely liked to have also picked more than one. Yeah, very good. But clear standout, absolutely compliance focused when we talk about assessment challenge. Wonderful. Kerri, do you want me to talk this one?
Yeah, you go for this one.
Okay. I think I always include a good quote in every presentation. This one we got a bit different with. So, how we sometimes feel when it comes to approaching the assessment design and delivery piece. So we're talking about that efficiency. We're talking about balancing all the different things that make things hard. And a little bit of a gift there, I suppose, just to show that, sometimes it is absolutely a balancing act. What drags our focus, what is our challenge can really get in the way. And sometimes it's choosing which balls not to juggle, which plates not to spin. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, like the image says, I'm sure you can spin a few more where we throw a few extra things into the mix as we go through.
Yeah, absolutely. We were looking in last week's webinar at the number of sort of current policy, and it was tracked back over the last 26 years, current to date. We've got something that you just never seen more and more policy applied and active than ever before. So yeah, it's certainly not getting any easier.
Just keep adding things. We don't really take them away, do we?
This is it. This is it. Sometimes a change in government or economic challenge might see some of that revised, but yeah, the trend is absolutely up and up with the complexity and the policy that's applied there. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Cool.
This is a nice one. Um, I really like how you've pulled this one in to say, after the webinar, let's know, we've got the tools to really focus on what it is that we're going to be able to do. And we do have quite a bit of a compliance focus today. So that will hopefully address 43% of your concerns, where we can stop spinning all the plates and really focus in on a few things and have a few takeaways at the end of the day.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, the focus is key, and aligning everything to some really actionable sort of takeaways is the ideal outcome for the session today. I think the best benefit we're going to be able to do is get a bit of clarity and give you a bit of empowerment here. All throwing ideas together, it hopefully will be really, really beneficial for the time spent. Awesome.
Okay, so let's have a look now, jumping into our content and looking at what is competency-based assessment and what we're hoping to achieve. Because I want to jump back to this foundation or basic of this, because a lot of the non-compliances that we see at audits, and we help RTOs with getting ready for an audit. We help them along the way. We have validations that we're doing all the time, but we also get calls from RTOs that have been audited and have been found non-compliant in a number of areas, and can guarantee that assessment is always on that list. So it's something that we see quite a bit. And there's a couple of different parts to what we see in these assessments that are often non-compliant. So we'll go to the first thing, and that is they know it. So if they know something, we'll see written questions, case studies, scenarios, etc. But then there's the question of, can they also do it? And to be competent, you need to both know it and be able to do it. What we're seeing quite often is that we don't have the practical component. We're not seeing if they can actually do it. They're telling us that they can do it. They're telling us what they would do in a certain situation, but they're not always actually demonstrating that. And quite often what we're seeing as non-compliant is putting in a case study or a simulation and talking about what you would do in a situation rather than having a practical observation. So we need to get back to those basics and remember that we are assessing skills and knowledge, and that means we must have those observations, whether it's via video or it might be a Zoom video, but not just saying, oh, what would you do in a certain situation? We actually have to demonstrate that we can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Gets into that sort of real world scenario. So as we are talking back in the digital learning day, it's a very strong focus on not just playing at it, and how we build those scenarios, how we make it real world. Typically, obviously here at Cloud Assess, assessments at the core of what we do. And typically, the challenges we hear from new customers on board is they need technology, they need solutions that support their assessment to be able to have the flexibility to show it and evidence and give us the different modes and methods that show us that they can do it. Moving into a digital space, moving it online with your tools. They know it is the knowledge piece is quite typically a bit more straightforward to how you would approach it. But having fantastic tools that give you that practical evidence, give you that application, and don't restrict you in your assessment delivery, is something we're extremely passionate around. Awesome.
Yeah. So we're going to have a little bit of a look at the revised draft outcome standards. And I just want to preface this with, they are still draft. We do have to wait until they are passed through all the steps that they have to go through. And keep in mind that there's other things happening in government at the moment. Just hold tight on some of this. Be considering what the changes are that you might need to do. Look at this in terms of a best practice approach, but do keep in mind that we do have to wait for government process to be followed before you put anything concrete in place. If you're to be audited right now, it will be against the current standards until such time as these are passed through. Okay. We are going to have a quick run through of a couple of these that relate to our assessment standards. So as you can see on the screen, we've got standards 1.3 through to 1.6 that relate to our assessment. And if you were to go through these in detail, a lot of what we already do is coming through in the new outcome standards. One of the areas that is a little bit different, which we're going to talk about, is validation. So validation is in there. And I've got another slide which will go through the details of what we've got there that is a bit different to what we're doing now. But essentially, if you're following good practices now with your assessment, there's not a lot that you're going to have to do to meet the requirements of the new standards.
Couldn't agree more. Absolutely, it's nearly an hourly check over the last couple of weeks and months to see where those new standards are, and yeah, still very much in draft. But I think we'll see some movement on that very soon.
Yeah, and JUA has said that there will be tweaks made because they've got their legislative writers going over this, turning that policy into legislation speak. So don't take them as being in concrete at this stage. We do have to wait for those processes to be run through. And that's why you see there's quite a few of us sort of standing back a little bit at this stage around putting out too many resources or PDs and those sorts of things, because we do want to see what the finalised version looks like. But for sure, consider how some of these things are going to impact your RTO and what you're going to need to be able to do. But like I said, with these assessment ones, if you're already doing a lot of things that meet the current requirements, then you're going to be okay with the assessment.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Yeah, great advice. We've always got to remember that the current standard is the current standard. So yeah, very much prepare, gain all the knowledge. But if you're delivering to the current standard, I agree with you. I think from an assessment perspective, you should be in a really strong place to adopt those changes when they finally do come.
Yeah, and we'll run through some specifics in a second. Also, ASQA are putting out the draft practice guides, which are a fantastic resource. They give you examples of what good practice looks like. So for those of you who you want to get an idea of, okay, well, how am I going to demonstrate compliance with the new standards? But as we've mentioned with assessment, it's very, very similar to what we've already got. So it's already a good resource for you to go to and say, okay, well, what could I be doing already to make sure that I'm showing compliance? It also has examples of risk. What does not bad look like, but what's going to cause a risk to your registration?
Yeah, absolutely. In post the event, we'll obviously send a pack recording and access to those links as well. So for all the attendees, you will be able to just jump straight in there, but very easily found on the ASQA website. So definitely worth having a look at. I do think it's a good place to start from, for sure. Got a number of questions coming into the Q&A around that as well. So something I'm sure that we'll be looking to address, yeah, in the Q&A.
So we're going to jump forward a little bit here, and I will come back to the changes around validation in terms of the standards, because that's where the biggest change is, and which isn't a massive change. But let's have a look at why assessment is so important in terms of our industry and the risk that if we don't do assessment well, what could actually happen? What could be the result of that? And if we look at just three main areas here, we need to make sure that we're ensuring industry standards. So as we mentioned earlier, Alex was talking about that industry engagement piece. By having our validation and our industry engagement practices, we're going to be able to then show how we're meeting the industry needs and industry standards. Someone did mention in a Q&A before something around training packages requiring some outdated practices that are not current with industry. And that is a challenge, and that's part of that whole reform around training package design. And hopefully, we're getting to a place where that's going to be addressed. But we do get stuck a little bit when there are some units of competency requiring you to do things that industry don't do anymore. And sometimes it's not allowed to be done anymore. It does cause a bit of a challenge there. And you've also got then regulators for other industries. So we've got licensed outcomes, you've got competing requirements around other regulators. And that's where that whole industry engagement practice becomes so important. And for every RTO to be involved in their industry bodies and providing a voice from the training sector to say, hey, we need to have this or we need to have that. So important around that gatekeeper of quality, because our graduates go out into that industry, and if they're not trained right, it can cause a massive risk to whole industries, but also to the reputation of the vet sector as well.
I couldn't agree more. With the industry standard, industry in certain context can change rapidly as well. There's a lot of outside influences on industry, and to remain compliant out in their world, workplace health and safety, other technology changes and standards, through COVID changes and impacts, it's never been more fluid. So keeping that aligned and ensuring that it aligns with training packages, I can understand why it's not quite perfect, but it does definitely bring its own challenges as well. So yeah, keen to always see that improve. I think we all will be, but yeah, there is some positive movement in that space, which is exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of that industry engagement that you do might be around how you can provide high quality training, and what practices are they seeing where people come out really well trained from wherever they've come from, because we often focus so much on assessment, we forget about making sure that the training is comprehensive. We've got a very big focus over the last few years on volume of learning, amount of training, etc. And it's just so important for us to make sure that we've got lots of touch points, we've got practice, we've got time to consume information. It's not just about working through some online materials or working through a workbook and then doing an assessment and getting a piece of paper. We need to make sure that we've got the quality there in the training, so that when someone goes out into the workplace, they actually know how to do what they need to do.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. The interesting thing here is as well, when we mention quality, when we're talking about quality of a resource, quality of a content piece, great data is what we need. We need to always go back to what is the outcome that is driving for us. Does it meet, how are we meeting the requirements? I can produce a piece of content, and I personally think it's fantastic quality, but are we checking that it's meeting its purpose? Is it fit for purpose? How are we doing that? And having the right tools, having the wider assessment system behind this, where you've got that validation piece in place and stuff, so critical to really validating that you've hit the mark with it.
Exactly. And I think we need to be considering that extra data when it comes to our validation practices. And this is where the new standards sort of, give some extra input into what we should be using. It's already in there at the moment around, having a look at that wider field of data when we're then reviewing our assessment and improving our practices and constantly monitoring and evaluating. But I think the new standards will make that evaluation of the data that we've got even more important, especially where we talk about engagement. So that whole area of the new standards, we're getting outside of our assessment discussion here, but where we've got things about engagement, we need to have a look at that engagement, because engagement and high quality training lead to better assessment outcomes.
Absolutely. And, it very much aligns to that gatekeeper equality piece. It really, really is relevant. But yeah, couldn't agree more. Awesome. Did you want to?
Yeah, we need to make sure. So part of the data that we're collecting, yes, we're getting our completion from students, we're getting feedback, we should be getting feedback along the way from students, but also our validation processes are core to that quality. And this is something that is so important, and it's very clear in our new standards. We need to be looking at this in more detail at all of our units of competency. And what we find at the moment is a lot of RTOs don't do pre-assessment validation or verification, as ASQA calls it on the website at the moment. They'll just have an assessment piece, they'll do a bit of a review, maybe a bit of a checklist, but they don't properly go through a validation process before using that assessment. And that's critical, because if there's gaps in that assessment, if the instructions aren't clear, if we've gone through some sort of process and identified those things, then we would have fixed them before they're actually used by students. We need to have a thorough pre-assessment validation prior to using our tools, and then also afterwards. Now, the new standards talk about for TAE, this isn't for other qualifications, but for TAE, it specifically says that after the first cohort of students go through using a set of assessment tools, that there needs to be post-assessment validation of those judgments with that first cohort, because it's so critical. And I think that should be part of every RTO's process, is that you are actually doing that post-assessment validation with your first group of students, because then you're actually looking at the outcomes and you can identify any issues before you then continue with others.
100%. I've always personally had a really strong focus on the post validation piece. For me, I think it's just such a big flag to really get, pre-assessment, absolutely critical. But the post validation is that sort of final piece that actually ensures that we are sufficient, that we have met the requirements, and gives you some fantastic information. When we look at that, there's nothing worse than perhaps getting a tool or an outcome that isn't right or isn't consistent. Could you imagine having, probably the most dangerous, incorrect outcome when we talk about quality is somebody that we've said is competent that isn't, that we're putting into the workplace. The risk there is considerable. Whereas we're probably going to get a lot more, vocal and a lot more sort of focus as a business on where we're saying not competent. Or where we're reassessing and stuff. Working through the dynamics of the quality model, the risk of putting somebody in a position incorrectly or awarding a competency incorrectly because our tools don't meet the requirement is a huge challenge.
The horse has bolted otherwise.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah, I just want to address something Tamara's just put in the questions, that feeling like validation should be done continuously, not just after the first time. And we are going to talk about that schedule that's there. But yes, we need to be looking at how often we validate, and it's not just the standards at the moment say at least once over the 5-year cycle. But if you're doing a validation of student judgments once in 5 years, how are you really ensuring quality? And what we're talking about here is not minimum compliance requirements. We're talking about quality. If you make changes to things, if you have a new trainer come on, all these different things change the risk that comes with the assessment process. And validation, post-assessment validation, is our only way of checking that things have been done right and that we've got that quality there. So I agree with Tamara. It would be something that I would be wanting to do on a regular basis.
Couldn't agree more, especially that post-assessment validation, I think is, if you can build it into your working week, build it into your normal daily processes, absolutely you should. Some fantastic tools. I'm going to plug Cloud Assess a little bit here, but within our tools, you've got the ability to drive statistic samples. You can focus on new stuff at different sample sizes and rates. And that is instant. So when judgments are made, when results are finalized, those items that you've predefined based on your risk profiles and your error of judgment really allow you to get really effective with that post-assessment validation as those results are occurring, as those competencies are being finalized and stuff. And yeah, what better way to deal with a problem than before it becomes any bigger?
Exactly. So important.
Awesome.
So
right.
This sort of looks at the cycle that we have here. And over on the right-hand side, we're starting with stage 1. And this is what we've talked about before, pre-assessment validation. So we need to make sure that we're doing that assessment, the validation of the unit of competency and the tools that we're using prior to using them. If you go and make major changes to something, then you need to go and do another validation because it's different. And you need to make sure that it's still meeting the requirements of what you need. So that pre-assessment validation is that very important stage 1. Stage 2 is where we are going to go and deliver and conduct, and that's where our processes come in. So if you've got a new trainer or a new assessor, there might be some things in there that you need to do to make sure that your practices are being followed the way that they should, that their marking is the right way. Have some moderation before results are given out to students. And then we have our stage 3 post-assessment validation. So looking at afterwards, have our assessments given us some valid, reliable results? Are they going to be consistent? Are they meeting the requirements of the unit? Are they authentic student work? We've got a big issue at the moment with plagiarism, using tools like ChatGPT, and that's a whole other discussion, which I'm sure will come up in the questions, but looking at our assessment design around that and having that post-validation. And that feeds into our sessions. So we've got there session 1, session 2, session 3. That's about training, providing the learning, giving time for practice, capturing the evidence, achieving competency, and then validating at the end.
Yeah, very, very much so. You touched on it earlier, Kerri, as well. The pre-validation, where we're making changes and we're, improving or updating resources and content. Those changes, sometimes this is where it's really, really key to use multiple different inputs from your industry engagement as well. Because we're being told or requested or asked for this change, we need to make sure that through a validation process that is the correct change to make, and that we just don't have a very strong voice from one direction with our industry engagement that might be misleading the requirements slightly there as well. Something I see from time to time where we're trying to satisfy perhaps a customer need and we haven't done the pre-validation where we've made those changes to ensure that it was correct.
Yeah. And then we end up with a gap or an issue with it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You can have a very robust process. You've done your pre-validation, but it's 5 years is a ridiculously long time if we're making any changes, sometimes even minor changes that compound. When we're having that input from industry, when we're having it from other sources, any change that has drives verified change to what we're doing, that pre-validation is so required.
Yeah. And so it's something that you're going to revisit. And when we look at the new standards shortly with some of the changes, it's now got the word regularly in there. And I think it's really important to understand there is a question that came up earlier in the chat around do we need to do every single unit of competency for pre-assessment validation? Absolutely, yes. You have to do at the moment, ASCL calls it verification, but they're expecting that you do that with every single unit of competency before you use it. Otherwise, you don't have a reliable assessment system. And this is also where a lot of RTOs are running into problems because they're not doing that pre-assessment validation for every unit. They're doing it for their a sample, doing 2 units. And sometimes they're not even doing it pre-assessment. They're doing it after when they do their post-validation. So we need to make sure that we're reviewing those assessments prior to use.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. There was quite a big piece of misunderstanding, I think, when the 5-year cycle was discussed around samples of training products and the like. And absolutely, it's every single unit of competency that is across your scope in that period. The sample size is not of the units on scope. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I'm sure when we get these standards finalised, we'll be able to do some more detailed work on your validation cycles.
So,
just a little bit of a dip then to your industry engagement practices. And we mentioned earlier around for informal activities. And I just wanted to say that a lot of the really valuable things that we sometimes do are through informal industry engagement activities. And they could be an email, a conversation. It's not that you're getting a pro forma filled out by someone. It's that you are having that conversation with them. And now in industry engagement is different to your currency activity. This is when you're talking about, these are our practices. What do you think of what we're doing? It's about getting the industry engagement feedback on what you are doing. If you're just going out and seeing what a business is doing in the industry, that's your currency. So that's not industry engagement. Engagement is a two-way conversation where you're providing information about your resources, your training, your assessment, your units of competency that you're doing, and you're getting valuable input on that. That's engagement. What we've got here is I've just got a really simple spreadsheet around some of the things that you could capture. Now, you're not going to have necessarily formal evidence, because if this is a conversation, you're just recording the details of the conversation. So this is a little bit extra. Angela McGregor has a saying around glitter and gold, and the gold is the really solid stuff, and that would be your formal industry engagement activities. It might be through a committee setup. It might be through getting someone to sit down with you and fill out the performers. But then this is the glitter. This is, well, yeah, we've done that twice a year, but we're doing all these other things as well. And that's where we come into the capturing the evidence of what you're actually doing, because you might be having all these wonderful conversations that, yeah, you don't have a proper form signed and filled out with evidence, but what are all the little things that you're doing just to say this is where this feedback came from?
Yeah, awesome explanation of the process. And, you know, this is a big driver as well for ensuring that we've contextualized correctly as well, that we're, you know, making those our assessment instruments and content really relevant to the desired outcomes. It really does bridge the gap between the unit standard and the real world requirement.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
Okay. Our validation practices. So let's look at this in a little bit of detail before I talk about some of our common issues around assessment tools. Key things. Your validation needs to happen of your assessment tools prior to use. Needs to happen after you have any changes that you make, as we mentioned before. It might be that you've got a new product. So if you have a unit of competency that changes and you've got a new unit of competency that you update it to, or it might be a new client that you've contextualized for, as Alex has said. So it might be that you've got a corporate client and you've gone and adjusted some of your assessments to specifically suit their environment. You need to then go and do a validation of that. So anytime we have these changes, before you use the tool, you go through a validation process. We also then have our validation schedule, and you've got your planned activities over your 5-year cycle, but that doesn't mean that you can't, that validation schedule should be changing. Whenever your scope changes, if you have a new offering that you put on, so your different modes, because if you think about it, it's not just the training product on your scope. So if you've got a unit of competency on a BSB CMM 301 and you deliver that in a face-to-face environment in a particular way, but then you've got a different offering that you offer that is 100% online, you've got a different set of assessment tools, well, you need to validate that separately because those assessment tools are different. So it's each set of tools that you have for units of competency that would be going on your validation schedule. And if you get a new client and you're going to go and contextualize it, that gets added to your validation schedule. So it would be something that you're updating continuously. And then you've got this evidence to show these are all the things that we've done. And you've got your validation schedule of your pre-assessment validation, and then you've got your evidence of your post-assessment validation samples. So your student work that has been completed and marked as competent, and you've got your validation of that sample of work. So we need to make sure that we're doing all of those things. And if you're not, that's something that you need to then include into your practices, because it's much more specific in the new standards around that, making sure every assessment tool is fit for purpose.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And you know, it's popped up in the chat as well. It is absolutely the assessment tools we're talking about when we talk about validation. When we reference units and scope, it's because that's coming from the training packages that meet your 5-year cycle. Our assessment tool is absolutely what we're validating. We're not looking beyond that at the unit level. But when we talk about our validation cycle over the 5 years, yeah, absolutely, it's key to you know, make sure that all our product is covered.
Yes.
Just a quick reminder to the attendees: there's a couple of hands go up in the webinar there. Jump into the Q&A. There is a Q&A that everybody can use. Just drop your thoughts in there. If you'd like us to have a look at something, we're definitely going to give you a bit of time at the end. There's plenty of airtime for the Q&As and stuff as well. We'll definitely be able to help you. And if you're having any technical issues or anything else, drop it into the Q&A. One of my colleagues will make sure you're well looked after. Awesome. Nothing further to add on that. I think that was a great explanation.
No.
I love the context you put into that, Kerri.
Other question there. Yep. I'll let Miles answer that one. Okay, so revised standards. What are the key differences that we've got in these revised standards compared to our current standards in clause 1.5 of the revised ones, compared to what we've got in the current standards around validation? The new word that has come in here, and it came up, I think it was Tamara mentioned before, continuously doing your validations. The word regularly is in there. So we need to make sure that we're doing regular validations. So we're not just saying, okay, well, at least once every 5 years, well, that's a minimum, but we need to be making sure if you make those changes, you need to come back to it. Another thing that is different is it's spelled it out. Like this is what it should be already, and this should be your practice for best practice, but that validation shouldn't be conducted by the person who developed the tools, because me going and looking at a tool that I've developed, it's like you said before, Alex, you could go and create something that you think is fantastic, but it's your viewpoint. So that objectivity needs to be there. And we need to remember that validation is not just about meeting the unit requirements. Okay, we're not just looking that we've got the keywords. We're not just looking to say, okay, well, 1.1's covered, 1.2's covered. Validation is bigger than that. Validation is covering off our principles of assessment, which we're going to revisit shortly, but we need to make sure that our validation is broader than just coverage of the unit. There's a lot more to it. So that objectivity needs to be there. It needs to be a separate person to the person who developed the tools. And we need to make sure, again, that we're showing evidence of how validation has led to changes in our assessment tools and practices, which is already something that is important. But, you know, we're not always showing that evidence.
Yep. Couldn't agree again. I think the objectivity piece, it's a very easy trap to fall into to feel that we're in the right position to validate our own work and our own changes and stuff. So yeah, very, very key. Awesome. One more Slido. So we'll give Miles an opportunity to catch up with the Q&A as well. Jump into Slido, scan the QR code. How is everybody feeling about the new outcome standards, which are still in draft, but we've all got a bit of exposure to what's to come. And yeah, let's get some thoughts up on the board. There's no wrong answers here, just straight off the cuff. How do we feel about those outcome standards? We got some very positive and excited, some uncertainty. Yeah, I was expecting that for sure. Keen, yeah. Kerri, I'm going to throw this one at you. What's your feeling about the new outcome standard?
Look, I think I agree with the person that says anxious to have them locked in and yeah, sick of waiting. We just need to wait until we get them locked in and then we know where we're going. So yeah, the uncertainty is difficult, especially if we get an election call tomorrow because we're going to caretaker mode. So then, you know, who knows what happens then. It just puts everything up in the air. So I'm really hoping that we get something happening or something confirmed really soon, either way, so that we know what we're working with and what those new standards are.
Yeah, awesome. I agree. I think once we've got the milestone, we can then be really effective. We know, the RTO world is so effective at delivering on project. We can manage ourselves to standards. It's part and parcel of what we do, but not having that defined milestone just means that it's very up in the air. But yeah, we've the emojis. Nothing more is needed than the mind blown.
Yeah.
Very good. And yeah, we talked to that, more and more sort of change to manage. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Alex, we might jump down to slide number 22.
So this one?
Keep going.
Sorry.
Yeah, we're just going. I'm just mindful of time so that we get through everything. When we talk about our validation, what I want to remind everyone is that there is a lot more to this than just the mapping of the unit. So there's been a few comments come into the Q&A there. Unit coverage is one thing. And, there's making sure that we cover what the unit requires. But if we run through our principles of assessment, our principles are firstly validity. Validity includes that coverage of the unit, but it's also, and this is straight from the current standards. I copied and pasted this from the current standards, and I realised I didn't capitalise the middle one. But these are dot points from the standards. So the unit coverage, we need to make sure that we've got coverage of the unit. So when you're looking at mapping and anything that looks at, okay, well, have we got unit coverage? That's one thing for validation of a whole lot of other things. So if you're stopping there at doing a mapping, or using a tool to check that, have we got the coverage of the unit? That's only one part of validation. We also then need to look at the types of methods of assessment that we've chosen. Are they fit for purpose for the unit of competency? We can see sometimes that, and we've seen it with different organisations where they just go, we're going to have a written assessment, we're going to have a observation and a third-party report, and we do that for every single unit of competency. And you say, hang on a minute, how do you do that with the requirements of this particular unit? Does it require something to be done in a particular way? Is it talking about participants doing a report? Does it talk about particular documentation? Sometimes you have to look at the unit and go, okay, well, that's not going to fit in with our formula of A, B, C. So going through our application and our appropriateness of our methods of assessment is another part of that validation process. And included in that is that assessment of knowledge and skills integrated with its practical application. And this particular part, that middle block, that's our answer to the questions coming through around how do we stop our students using ChatGPT to write the answers. We don't necessarily want an answer that is just, list the 5 points of blah or explain what this means. What we want to do is have our practical activities that we're doing with our student. It might be a particular case study that they're working on or a practical thing that they've done in a workplace. Our knowledge assessment then becomes about what they've done in that practical setting. And that's a current requirement of the unit of of the standards. We need to have that. And that's where we're seeing non-compliances as well, where we've just got assessments where students can just copy from ChatGPT or take from online.
Absolutely. Lots of variation in quality there as well that drives those problems. But yeah, questions that drive critical thinking, that engage to show not just the knowledge, but the absolutely evidence of skill. Is absolutely the way to go. Awesome. Okay. We'll move to the next, assessment methods. So when we're looking at assessment methods, what is required?
Yes, and this is something I wanted to have this repeating in every single one, regardless of your assessment method that you are choosing, whether it's a practical assessment, projects where you've got different documentation. Someone mentioned having an online meeting and then they've got minutes, etc. It might be a written, every single format, you need evidence and you need a decision-making tool. And that's usually your checklist with your written responses. If that's, it might just be multiple choice or something that's auto-marked. Well, your checklist is the correct answers that it's going with, but you must have the evidence and then you must have your decision-making tool. And often we're seeing, someone submits a video as their assessment and then it's just signed off as being satisfactory. That's not enough. We need to have that checklist there to demonstrate how you made your decision and your feedback to the student.
Awesome. Yeah, I agree. I think that's very much the case across all of those methods. Don't forget the basics. Yeah. Need to be there for sure. Okay, so some examples, some sort of pieces that are talking about that engaging versus, I don't know if I like the term boring assessment, but we've got it there. So before and after. So a bad example is something that doesn't engage. It's ineffective. It doesn't really and truthfully give us quality outcome here. So, there's an example, list the 5 steps for hazard identification. And literally, this is where our ChatGPT, where our non-critical thinking mind comes in, the copy paste from the learner guide, and the like, we're reciting the information. What we want is something that's engaging and practical. So we want to place the learner in that scenario. We want to engage how they're going to apply the knowledge that they've got. That's what we want to drive out of an assessment sort of piece. So here in the scenario, we've put them in situ, we're on site, and a worker spots a chemical spill. What should you do first? This has gone back to a multiple choice question, but you can frame this however you want. It's just a different, clear way of showing you perhaps good versus better, or bad versus better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's putting that into that practical setting rather than just having a list of things. They need to think about it.
Yeah, for sure. So
now, I'm mindful of time, so we might run through these quite quickly. Basically, what I've put in here are some written assessment types that we might need to think about, whether it comes in as a reflection, a report, a quiz, etc. But that's going to be our evidence. And then we need our marking guide of what we would be expecting. And then also our feedback to the students. Okay, so we'll jump to the next one because this is something that comes up all the time. Is this sufficient evidence for implementation of a project plan? This is something that we do see quite a bit. So our unit requires students to develop and implement a project plan. It's an online course. Students have developed a plan and submitted their plan that they've developed. But because you're not in the workplace, you've gone, okay, well, here's a case study that describes the process that's been followed to implement a project plan. But we're going to get you to analyse that case study and tell us what went wrong. And that's going to be your part that is the implementation of the project plan. Is that sufficient?
Awesome. So I can see a few people jumping into the Slido. If you haven't, jump in there. Should be a multiple choice sort of piece. Yes, no, or not sure, don't know. Let's give you just a couple of seconds on this one. We'll get in there and get some outcomes. I was expecting to see some responses here. Maybe I'll into the live screen here. The poll is active, but yeah, I'm sure some of you are voting by now. We might have to make some assumptions there.
It might not be submitting right on
yeah,
you know, when they click.
Yeah.
There might be a submit button that you have to click rather than just clicking on yes, no, or don't know. Maybe there's something extra there because we've got a lot of people in there.
There is a lot of people in there. I'm not seeing an outcome.
It's not coming through.
Don't worry. So I think, we've just got a couple in the Q&A. So letting us know
not working.
Sufficient evidence for implementing a project plan. Kerri, your thoughts on this one? I'll do mine.
Not enough. It's what we had on that very first slide back at the beginning. We need to show that what we know and what we can do. And Gemma said in that chat, the first, it maps quite well to the knowledge requirement, but we don't have our practical application. So we've got the development of a plan and we'll have a checklist that marks that, but then we can't just give a case study because describing what is in a case study is not showing that they can go into a workplace and do it.
Yeah, agree.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. Okay. You have to move. Yeah, that was an interesting.
Someone just said there is a send button. Excellent.
Yeah,
and there are quite a few people that said yes or don't know because we are seeing this so much where we're going, okay, well, it's too hard or we're not sure how to implement this. We don't know how to do it in a proper setting. We're doing an online course, but you can't mark someone as satisfactory unless they've actually implemented a project plan. And our team did our Cert 4 project management couple of years ago, and we had to implement it went over a period of time. You have to actually do it and implement. So really look at your units of competency and don't just go for a case study when it seems too hard to do something because RTOs are getting made non-compliant on this.
Couldn't agree more.
A bit more of the same. We might just skip through through these slides because you'll have the slides there with the examples, but the important thing there is that we do have evidence and we've got feedback and we've got our decision-making tool. We're all too often seeing that there's no decision-making tool. It's just an overall or being marked off against a unit of competency. You need to break down what it is that you're looking for.
Fantastic.
Just a few things here around making our assessments interactive and impactful for our learners. Really, we need to make sure we've got that active engagement, so they're actually getting involved. That's where we have, some different types of assessments. So we've got the variation of different things. We've got personalisation, which is about contextualising and making sure it's in the right context for the workplace or industry. Immediate and meaningful feedback. This is where some of your auto-marked formative questions can come in so that it can give your students some really good feedback. But what often is missed there is putting in written feedback with certain responses. You want to actually not just say they got it wrong, but give some feedback around that. And it does take time to write out that remediation to actually give some explanation, but it's really, really important for that to be there. We've got a variety of evidence types, and that's also making sure that we've got our competency across different settings. We want to make sure it's real world application. I think that goes without saying. Rather than just being case study, it needs to be, okay, well, this is how we do it in the workplace. Our learners love often technology, and we look at how we can incorporate that, but that's also current with industry. But at the same time, we need to make sure we've got accessible and inclusive resources and assessment tools, making sure that we've got things available like screen readers, closed captions on videos and those sorts of things.
Absolutely. And to know that we've achieved what we set out to do, that validation piece is so important as well. It's it's definitely filling in the blanks for us. I'm going to quickly jump into our new content designer. So we've talked about all the different modes and methods of assessment, the requirements that are there. We need tools that give us the ability to represent those materials without compromise. So our assessment instruments, how flexible can we have them? There's so many different, every mode and method of assessment should be catered for in your online tools. And now here at Cloud Assess, obviously assessment is absolutely at the heart of everything we do. So we're going to just jump in. We've completely ground up rebuilt our assessment designer to allow more and more flexibility and just great ways of gathering interactions, embedding content, interactivity, and giving you lots of smarts within it. So we're working through an example here where you can have interactive sort of flashcards and twisties to present information in a more engaging way, expanding of information. So we're not just looking at blocks of text. We can embed multimedia within all of these different scenarios, tabs where we can move through information in a different way and use different parts of our kind of brain and how we're consuming that information, trying to touch on all the different learning styles as we go. Audio and video embedded, you name it, presentation absolutely to the max. For any of you that are using sort of tools like Articulate, Storyline, Rise, Adobe, this absolutely, it's unashamedly, we've taken the best of the best and we've brought it all together for our Cloud Assess customers. Answers that can be auto-marked, text responses that can be auto-marked, fill in the blanks, single select, multiple select, you name it, drop-down lists, written questions, observations, evidence gathering, checklists, every mode and method that we've ever come across, you should be able to present your tools and your information in a really nice, clean, engaging, and very, very modern tool. Evidence
I love
capture.
that rubric.
Yeah.
Love the rubric.
Exactly right. Yeah. So yeah, lots of really cool stuff. Sketch pads where we're taking really practical sort of applications as well. It's a true drag and drop editor. All of the field types, all of the interaction, all of the engagement pieces, like I say, you'll find it in the best softwares. We've made it better, brought it into our product. So we'll jump back to the slides here and we'll just finish off with the last couple. And we've just about scraped in on time. It's a big subject, as you can all see. So we'll just do a quick wrap up on key takeaways, and then we'll hang about for the Q&A.
Yeah, I think one of our key things around that gatekeeper equality is really making sure we've got the right assessment methods, we're doing our validation activities, and we're doing them regularly across all of our units of competency before we go and deliver. And remembering that validation is not just about mapping to the unit of competency. There's a whole lot more to that process to really get the big picture and make sure we've got everything covered. In terms of our methods, in terms of our AQF level, in terms of our ACSF, our learning, reading, writing, oral communication, numeracy, our digital, all these different things that actually then come into and feed into our quality assessments.
Awesome. Yeah. And when we go back to the little sort of graphic that we had around sort of what we're going to try and empower and with the takeaways, I think, really getting into that best practice, crafting really effective assessment, real strong sort of review of your validation processes, how comfortable we feel with those. Some great conversations have been happening in the Q&A as well. But I'll always stress it, the technology piece in your assessment design, having fit for purpose systems that really align to your requirements is absolutely key to fixing some of the challenges, especially around that efficiency piece, and having fantastic data to work with there as well. Awesome. Okay. Q&As, I know that's been happening all the way through the webinar. Just to recap, you will all be getting a bit of a slide pack as well with recording of the video, so all the links and information. Kerri has been fantastic, giving you all a bit of an exclusive offer for attending the webinar here. Please do scan the QR code, jump in when you review the video and stuff. 15% off assessment validation services for 5 units of competency for everybody that attended today. Couldn't have a better organisation looking after you there. I strongly recommend you do take that offer up. And just keep in touch with us. There's a bit of a way to jump in. There's an iPad drawer here, but you can jump in, find out more about our solutions for the industry. And you can also have a look through some fantastic content that's available on the website. We have the RTO Hub and lots of great resources. Please jump in, find out more about Cloud Assess as well. And we're at our hour. We'll jump into some Q&As that are open, if anybody would like to stay around for that, and we'll go from there.
I'm going to jump into one of the questions that just popped up, or comments. A marking guide is not a criteria. 100%. It's something that we struggle with getting that message across, that a marking guide is not going to give you your criteria. You need to have your criteria along with a marking guide or a sample answer you might have there. What are the key things that you are looking for to mark something satisfactory? So great comment. Like that one.
Yeah, I do too. I like that.